And thank you for joining us. A big thank you to Dale Webster and Maya Goodall from Core Learning. And the Reading League Michigan is thankful to have you and to host all of you this evening. The Reading League's mission is to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of scientific aligned reading instruction throughout all of our states. Reading League has 33 chapters. So if you are not a member of a Reading League, please do join, particularly if you are from Michigan and you are joining us this evening, but you're not a member, please do consider joining us and check out your state at the readingleague.org to see if there is a chapter if you're with us this evening and you're not from Michigan. The goals of the Reading League, I'll just put them up here and go over them very briefly. It's to provide professional development to teachers in the content of the science of reading. And thereby, we have Dale and Maya with us today, or this evening. We're not going to take you guys all the way back. Our mission is to support educators and administrators in translating the science to classroom application through a community of practice. We value mission partnerships, and we connect with organizations like Core Learning to move the mission of the Reading League and the science of reading forward in all of our states. We encourage university participation and movement towards the science of reading. The ideal for all of us in education is for our teachers to come to the classroom fully equipped. And last but not least is to support parents in learning and advocating for evidence-informed practice that aligns with the science of reading. Here is a QR code for those of you that might be interested in the Reading League Michigan and joining us. I'll give it about a few seconds if you're not already a member. And quick overview of our upcoming events. We have the amazing Dr. Jane Ashby joining us Saturday morning for a coffee chat. Grab your coffee, your kid, your cat, a cookie. Come join us at 9 o'clock in the morning. And Dr. Ashby, she lives in Michigan, and she's a renowned researcher and a professor at Mount St. Joseph. We would really like you to join us as she reviews the Phonemic Awareness Guide for Educators. And they have a nice section in the Phonemic Awareness Guide related to multilingual learners. We also will be following that with a presentation by Dr. Ulia Kovelman. I say that wrong. It's Kovelman from the University of Michigan. She's a brain researcher as well. And she does work with multilingual learners as well as dyslexic students. So she is a gift in Michigan, and the whole team at their lab they're a treat, and you will enjoy your time with Dr. Kovelman. Do not be intimidated by the fact that she is a brain researcher. She's a delight. We'll follow that with when we consider bilingual instruction and dyslexic learners, the morphological awareness kind of crosses both of these areas of practice. Dr. Kovelman and Rebecca Tolson will talk to us about brain behavior focus on morphological awareness. And don't miss our February 22nd conference at Saginaw Valley State University, where our keynote will be Dr. Mitchell Brookins. Dr. Antonio Fierro will conduct a session, and we'll close out with Susan Lambert. She's not a doctor yet. She's nearly there. And we will also have a lovely panel with Department of Education, MDE. Renee Garcia will join us and talk about diverse book sets and the work that they've done at Benton Harbor schools. And we're just trying to humanize our State Department because we have an amazing team there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Maya and Dale Webster. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Rebecca, thank you so much for the introduction and for all of the information on the Reading League Michigan. We are proud supporters of the Reading League nationally and, of course, all the state sites. So super excited and happy to be here this evening. And tonight, Dale and I are going to talk about structured literacy and second language acquisition. I have had the opportunity to co-present with Dr. Yulia Kovelman, and it is a delight, just like you say. So I have been schooled in her ways and love that. So we're going to talk about Building Literacy Foundations for Multilingual Learners. And let's see, go ahead to the next slide, Dale. My name is Maya Valencia Goodall, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at CORE. And my background is really, it's in teaching. I started as a classroom teacher. I also have a background in applied linguistics and, of course, in education. And so, really, what I do is spend my time thinking about science of reading, structured literacy, and how it applies to second language acquisition, multilingual learners in particular. In lots of spaces and places, I talk about my own personal story with language. And because we have such a short amount of time tonight, I'm not going to talk about it, but really you can read about it and see it in other webinars. It's very dear to me, and it's what I've spent my professional career discussing. I'm going to let Dale introduce himself, but just to say that we together also have an article in the Reading League Journal. You see it there on the screen. And what we're doing is we're bringing to life this article. We are talking about the different components that you can read more about in this article, which is free online. It's a special section of the Reading League Journal from this past summer. Dale?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know I'm in Arizona, so it's 5 here, so I think it's about 7 o'clock your time. So it's getting late, end of the day. So I appreciate your time. And just to follow up with what Maya had said about the article, if you go to the Reading League and click on the journal page, you'll see near the bottom it talks about a sneak peek, and there are several articles that you can choose. And this one that Maya pointed out is available to read for free. So um, I'm I will be celebrating my 13th year at CORE in February. I can't believe it's been that long, and have had a wonderful career in this space of the science of reading since 1996 when I first learned about it. Back then, it was called Scientifically Based Reading Research, or SBRR, for those of you long timers. Um, but I started out also as a teacher. In fact, I love telling this story. Maya and I taught at the same school in San Diego, but we were 2 years apart. And so we never knew each other. And we kind of, from that point, led parallel lives in the science of reading space and just met each other for the first time like a year and a half ago when she first came to CORE. So I love telling that story because it's just interesting how paths eventually cross, even if it's destined. So that's the way I look at it. But other arenas I've been in this professional learning space for quite a while, supporting district implementation in Los Angeles Unified School District, my old district, San Diego City Schools. And also in Texas with the Texas Reading First Initiative. So really happy again to be with you all tonight and share a little bit about what we both know. And I'll take you to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about how everything begins with language, and we're going to spend a little bit time there talking about the foundation of language. We're going to talk about evidence-based approaches, and then how we bring those together by embracing structured multiliteracy. Thank you. So we'll start with where it all begins. So first, just to orient ourselves and understand that the multilingual learners in our classrooms, these are students that basically make up the majority of our classrooms. If not, at least they're really bringing in a lot of demographic. We have this number growing in all of our classrooms across the United States. And I'm just spend a little bit of time here because it's very important to understand that in the past, the way that professional learning has been created or written, or even curriculum is written, it's written with this idea of a mythical monolingual class where all of your students are perhaps on grade level or just a little bit behind, that all of your students speak English. And then you might have one student here who speaks another language, has the wonderful opportunity of coming to school to learn English. Or you might have one student here who needs extra repetition. And what we know, what the reality is telling us, is that sort of mythical monolingual class does not exist anymore. We understand that really our classrooms are diverse, they're inclusive, and we as educators have to be able to reach the needs of all of our students in the class. So just want to orient that, multilingual learners, language diverse students, students who speak an English language variety, students who need extra repetition, and perhaps who are dyslexic. All of those students are our students. They're all in our classrooms pretty much all the time. So we just want to orient ourselves around, our real life classrooms. Okay, so thinking about language and how it all begins with language, and it is reading comprehension. That's what it is in this sentence. And it all begins with language. Our brains are wired for language. So that means that when we are born, if we are exposed to a language from our caregivers, over time, we will pick up that language. Our synapses will start to fire. We have a place for that information to go to in our brains. We're born with that. When you listen to Dr. Yulia Kovelman, you'll hear more about the brain and all the language processing centers. The language processing center and the reading center are in the same place in our brains. But when we talk about the fact that our brains are wired for it, it sometimes gives us this idea that we don't have to have explicit teaching around language. And I think that that is where perhaps some of the disconnect is. We're going to show a video in just a minute, but if you think about yourself, if you've ever been a caregiver to a small child, or if you are around children, young children, kindergarten, first, second grade, no matter what's happening, you're giving explicit instruction for language with your students or with your children or who you may have given care to and when they were younger. There's lots of repetition. So, the characteristics of effective instructional practices like repetition, like explicit, systematic, and direct, like opportunities to try and then giving feedback. All of those things happen when we're learning our first language. And so, although our brains are wired for it, it's not to say that we don't need explicit instruction in language, our first language, and of course, in our second language. The other thing that we understand about language is it is a human need. It's not just a nice to have thing. As human beings, it's one of our basic needs. We have to be able to communicate. We have to be able to express ourselves. We have to do that in order to align ourselves, in order to feel belonging. And of course, our entire, civilizations as human beings is developed and based on this idea and opportunity to communicate. So language, whether it's spoken or signed or written or done in another way, is very important, and it is a need for all of us. And as I already said, it has to be explicitly taught. If it's your first language or your second language, either way, it is explicitly taught. So we'll just take a quick minute with this video.
In it though? No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh no, not this one. This is the grand finale of it. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right, don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't break it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. And then it was like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? But don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy. Right.
Thank you, Dale. I love that video because it just really, really shows how that explicit interaction with language is key to the interactions that caregivers are having with their children that they're caring for. So, if you want to take a second and just think about some of the things that you saw in that video that espouse the effective instructional practices that you're familiar with, maybe it's repetition, maybe it is thinking about prosody. Maybe it is, I'll stop saying things so that you have a moment if you want to type in the chat some of the things that you recognize in explicit, systematic, and direct teaching or effective instructional teaching practices. Awesome. Yes, feedback for sure. Back and forth exchange. I love that. Yes, unconditional positive regard. And we know that creating those safe spaces for learning is really important. That opportunity for expression and for practice is over and over again. And the other thing I want to point out is that this caregiver in this video is not rushing the baby to talk. There's that time in between, which is the normal cadence for speaking and having a conversation. They're not jumping in, trying to talk for them, just waiting for the baby in this video to have the time to express themselves as they're ready to. We could go to the next slide.
Just one thing, I want to lift up the encouragement that a couple people wrote, which is
Yes.
what you just talked about, like the whole idea of, I mean, they were truly having a conversation, whether the caregiver was fully understanding everything that the baby was saying and the baby was fully understanding everything the caregiver was saying. That's not the point, right? This is about how language is developed, and the fact that they were engaged in that conversation, that's the encouragement.
Thank you, Dale. Love that. Yes, indeed. So what we notice when we think about this, we know that effective instructional practices is that I do, we do, you do. We just saw it in a very seamless interaction with a caregiver and a child. And we can think about these when we are with our students in our classrooms. So when we think about that second language acquisition, we understand that what we know from effective instructional practices also applies to language learning. So we need that language instruction to be direct, to be explicit. We need to have structured routines, and we need to have that corrective, affirming feedback. Someone has to let us know when they understand what we've said, when we've said things correctly. And when we're talking about corrective, affirming feedback, we're also thinking about the cognitive load that we're asking the students to engage in at that moment. So when I'm talking about effective instruction and structured routines for language, I'm talking about this opportunity to engage in conversations. And engaging in conversations is peer to peer. So really having this time where students are able to talk with their peers. Perhaps there's been some teacher time set up with that direct and explicit instruction. And now for this you do portion of our lesson, we really want to make sure that the students are speaking out loud. Responding to a question that the teacher has given whole group is not the same as having a conversation one-on-one or in a small group with your peers. So we're really talking about structured routines that encourage those conversations. And in those conversations, the teacher has decided ahead of time where the cognitive load is going to be. Is the cognitive load going to be on the content? Do I really want to make sure you understand the science or math or social studies content that we're discussing? Or is the cognitive load on the language that I want you to learn? So if I'm having you do a comparison contrast type of conversation, it's really focused on the grammar that is necessary around a comparison contrast conversation. That will then let us know as language teachers, where are we giving that corrective affirming feedback? because too much at one time diminishes that sense of encouragement that we just uplifted, that positive regard, right? We want to make sure that we're always keeping in mind that positive regard, that encouragement, and accepting things based on where the cognitive load is supposed to be at that moment. Next slide, please. And then I also want to just discuss for a moment the concept that it is completely possible to learn how to read, write, and speak in two languages at the same time. I didn't go into a great amount of detail from my experience, but Dale brought up that we've been in this world for quite a long time. And in fact, when I first started teaching, in California is when Prop 227 passed, and that was the English only law. And I bring that up because there was erroneous research that was floated around at the time saying that one language could really inhibit the learning of the second language, or that one language could really needed to be learned in order to then learn the second language. So both the monolingual advocates and the bilingual advocates took a portion of this research and believed it to be true. And we know that because either the monolingual advocates were talking about English only because they thought that you could only learn one language at one time, or the bilingual advocates said it was important to learn the heritage language fully before we then transitioned over into the second language. So then you saw Spanish being taught in isolation, so not in a dual immersion scenario. And then there was this transition time, like around third grade, where the students would then transition to English. And what we know is neither one of those are correct. In fact, you can learn how to read, write, and speak in two languages at the very same time from birth. So you don't have to wait. You don't have to teach one language and then the other. And from, this moment, the silver lining that grew from that dark time of Prop 227 is the emergence and really proliferation of dual immersion. So then what we understood in the bilingual advocacy world is, yes, we can do this, we can do them both at the same time, and we don't have to wait for one and then the other. And in fact, because the language processing center in our brains is actually in the same place, we can use one language to help us learn another language and back and forth again. It's a symbiotic relationship. The other thing is to really take the learning of English out of the concept of it being an intervention. In the very beginning of my career, we used to talk about language learning as a tier 2 intervention in RTI. It was something that, language was something that we were intervening on. There's all kinds of deficit language around this. In the beginning of my career, students were labeled as limited English proficient. And then, since then the labels have changed, and the label changing is a reflection of our new knowledge and what we know about what students are capable of and what can be taught and done at school. So I want to share widely that, the concept that learning of English in and of itself is not an intervention activity. So we can think about students who go to school in China, who are, in school in China, in school in Brazil, in school in France or Germany. And we can think about a child going to school to learn English. And in those contexts, that is not considered an intervention. It is considered an opportunity for bilingualism. Usually the parents, the teachers, the schools are excited and enthusiastic about teaching and learning of English. Except when that same child, if they were to move to the United States and go to school to learn English, it's a completely different context. And so really in my career, because I've had the opportunity to live and teach abroad and, study applied linguistics, really thinking about the best parts of foreign language teaching and learning and what we can bring to the way that we do that here in the United States. And one is to really understand that learning English is an opportunity for bilingualism. And then, of course, finally, and again, to restate that language learning has to be explicitly taught. And that goes for both the first language and the second language. Next slide. So just to pause for a moment on the concept of simultaneous bilinguals and sequential bilinguals. So simultaneous bilinguals are people who learn two languages at the same time from birth. So perhaps they live in a home where, one parent speaks one language, the other parent speaks another language. There's a whole movement actually in the United States. It's called OPAL, one parent, one language. And you maybe the child is exposed from birth, and that the child will need the systematic explicit instruction that usually happens what appears to be naturally, but is still following a lot of the components of effective instructional practices. And then, of course, the majority of us are sequential bilinguals, usually learning the second language after age 5 or above. That's the case for myself and the majority of all bilinguals in the world. And this also means that there has to be explicit instruction for learning the second language or third language or fourth language. But just to really understand your students, where they are, what they bring to you, this is all cognitive background that the students can bring to their language learning journey. So it's really important for us, and I think this group will already naturally agree that structured literacy matters and to all of our students. The components of structured literacy and what we know about how the brain learns both language and how to read is applicable to multilingual learners, English language variety speakers, and everyone else in our classrooms. Next slide. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dale.
Thanks, Maya. So in this next section, I'll be talking about evidence-based approaches. I think many of you are familiar with both of these documents, seminal documents, I would say, the National Reading Panel report published in 2000, and then the National Literacy Panel on Language Minority Children and Youth, the Developing Literacy and Second Language Learners, published in 2006. And both of those set a foundation for reading instruction in the United States and across other English-speaking countries by establishing, first of all, the 5 components of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension. And that came from the National Reading Panel. I think we had a conception of that prior to 2000, but it wasn't clearly labeled in our materials, in our language around reading instruction. And so when that panel published the report, those 5 components became kind of the centerpiece of professional learning for teachers. And teachers now, I think that's pretty ubiquitous. Almost every elementary reading teacher can say and teach and say they teach the 5 components of reading. The developing literacy and second language learners. Let me back up a little bit. One of the criticisms of the National Reading Panel report was that it wasn't clear that there was enough research on English learners or multilingual learners. And so the question was asked right from the beginning, what about students who are learning the second language? And so from that, the published report in 2006 was born by Diane August and Tim Shanahan and the panel. And significant findings came from that report, and you can see those bulleted here on the slide, that literacy instruction in both native language and English benefits multilingual learners. And it goes back to what Maya was saying, that we knew even back then that having 2 languages was going to be beneficial. Multilingualism is an asset. It's not a barrier to success. So that the first language doesn't have to interfere with learning a second language. It can be seen as an asset, but teachers need to be given the instructional practices and the knowledge and the coaching to be able to bring those assets to bear and not treat it as a deficit, because that's kind of the culture in our country. Even to this day, I think we're starting to make that shift, but and talking more and more about asset-based orientation in our teaching and our work with kids. And of course, that multilingual learners benefit from the instruction in the 5 essential components of reading, but that multilingual learners need additional speaking practice. They need opportunities for structured academic talk and not just the one back and forth conversations between teacher and student that we so much of the time see in the classroom. That space needs to be given to kids for kids to talk to each other in very structured ways. I am sure that all of you have seen this many times, and so I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking through this, and hopefully it will confirm what you know about this, and also maybe add a little bit more for you to be able to talk about it with others. But this was Scarborough's reading rope, and a lot of people think that they know about the simple view of reading, which is word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension, and that this came from that. But really, it wasn't Hollis Scarborough's intent to replicate that model of reading. It's just when she was doing her research, she was looking at all the different components that contributed to skilled reading, and this is what she came with, and of course came out with the two major strands of word recognition and also language comprehension. And within the word recognition strand, we understand that those are finite skills. Those are what researchers call constrained skills, meaning that these are a finite set of skills that kids can learn early in their elementary career, and then they're set up for success going forward in terms of being able to lift the words off the page. And so ideally, we'll have students learning be fluent readers by the end of third grade. That's why we see a lot of initiatives about reading by nine or third grade, etc. In some cases, we have kids that need a little longer, but I would argue that by the end of elementary, absolutely, we should have every kid leaving elementary school with those strong word recognition skills. At the same time, starting from even before kids enter kindergarten, we're developing language comprehension, and we're doing this in lots of different ways. We're doing it through spoken language practice, like you saw in the video with parent, child, or caregiver and child interactions that start from almost birth. Well, even before birth, right? And then that continues to be developed over time with the interactions that caregivers and kids have. Then when we get to school, we have the school-based setting, and read alouds can really be a good way for language comprehension to continue to develop and help kids really understand the language of school, academic language. And this is where I'm going to say this is where we can do better in terms of the opportunities, giving students opportunities during read aloud to really talk about the content that they're learning about through the read aloud, but also giving the structures, sentence frames, the vocabulary to be able to practice the language about whatever topic that they're learning about. And so, through all of this, language comprehension also is directly taught. And these are unconstrained skills and can be learned and developed across a lifetime. That we start from birth and until the day we die, as long as we're reading, writing, speaking, interacting, learning about the world, we are developing language comprehension. And together, word recognition and language comprehension create the opportunity for skilled reading comprehension as we know it. The other thing I will say before I move on to the next slide is not only does this apply to literacy instruction, but also we can think about this in terms of spoken language development, right? Especially in terms of language comprehension strand. So I love this quote from Speech to Print, where we talk about reading, after all, is not a rote exercise and recitation of words, but it's really a translation of print to speech to meaning that's mediated by the center of the language center of the brain. And thus, language itself is the substance of instruction. And I love that last sentence because that really is the focus of structured literacy, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But we've known for a long time, research has known for a long time that reading and writing builds on language. Without spoken language, we would not have reading and writing developed about 5,000 years ago. So when we look at all these components, the sound system, which equates to phonology. We look at the writing system, which equates to orthography. Orthography is a written language component, not an oral language component. The ones that are listed in white at the bottom of each of the ovals really are part of the oral language domains that we all come with in terms of our first language learning. Pragmatics is the social context in which we use language. Morphology are the word parts, prefixes, suffixes, Greek and Latin roots. Semantics is really referring to meaning at the word level, our vocabulary, um, sentence level understanding, passage level understanding. Discourse structure is not necessarily an oral language domain. However, we can equate that to text structure. We have a way that we speak. We have a way that written language is designed in terms of narrative text or informational text. And then we have syntax, right? Which is the way sentences are organized within the sentence, the word order, the grammar. That's very important, and that all kids come to school with understanding syntax, morphology, and phonology, even if it's inherent and they don't explicitly know it. They know it inherently, and that's why they are capable language speakers when they enter school. So when we think about the language domain and the instructional components that go along with that, I want to make this connection. In just a minute, I'm going to have you go into breakout rooms and just talk with a partner about how you think about these language domains and how you make those explicit to your kids in terms of these instructional components. So when we think about phonology, which is our sound system of language and phonemes, we see that played out in word recognition instruction, and that's really when we're thinking about automatically being able to read words. Phonemic awareness obviously is dealing with, and we're teaching about sounds and having students think about sounds in a different way. Phonics, of course, does that as well. Orthography is our writing system, our spelling patterns and words. Again, word recognition, that alphabetic principle, that the understanding that these little black squiggles on the page are letters and that they carry meaning when they're put into words and attached to sounds. And that's phonics and spelling as well. Morphology, as I said before, are units of meaning, right? That's word recognition, advanced phonics, and word study, where we're looking at syllables, but also looking at those larger chunks of words that not only can be decoded, but they carry those units of meaning, carry meaning, so we can understand larger words and we can break those words down into their component units of meaning to gain meaning from that word. Semantics is meaning again at the word, sentence, and passage levels, and that occurs during comprehension instruction, vocabulary, written expression, and also word choice. And then syntax again is word order, grammar, structure, and sentence comprehension and sentence construction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat a link to this presentation so that you have this as a resource for your conversations. You can go back. This is slide 15. Oops, I didn't mean to send it just to Christine. I meant to send it to everyone. Someone sent me a private message, which I haven't seen. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. And Rebecca, you can, while you're putting people in the breakout, getting the breakout rooms organized, I'll talk a little bit about this. So I want you to think about one of the instructional components that I talked about earlier. Oops. These different instructional components that you see on the right. And how do you explicitly convey the language domain in your teaching? And thinking about during speaking instruction, but also during reading instruction. And I want to clarify the directions. We're not talking about teaching the terms of language, which is phonology, orthography, morphology. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do you teach morphemes? How do you teach vocabulary? And share some examples of how through your reading instruction, you're teaching language. All right, is that any clarifications needed before we put you into breakout rooms? Okay, we'll give you about maybe 3 minutes to talk, and then we'll come back.
Okay, here goes the rooms. So we're gonna close the rooms at about 1:45, Dale.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go join a room.
How did that happen?
I was at a conference earlier today and he was speaking at the conference.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just say that the word recognition, phonemic awareness, I do that even with my multilingual kids. I do the Equip for Reading Success. We go over the sounds of the English language. We review them a lot with UFLI, and also I use Just Words with some, which is Wilson. There is a lot having to do with, all of this. I would say with the comprehension of vocabulary, one of the things that we do, I'm looking at morphology. It's built into the lessons that I'm teaching so much.
Okay, it's 1:45, so I'll close the breakout rooms.
Good. I'm not. Was it going to give them a few more, like another few seconds to finish up?
It gives them 60 seconds when you
Yeah.
close the room. Yeah.
Okay. I saw one person come back, so then I was like, "Where's everybody else?"
Yeah. 23 seconds left.
Great.
That
Thank
means
you.
they're having great conversations and they're finishing them up.
Yeah. All right. Looks like everyone's coming back. Thank you. Hope you had some good conversations. In the interest of time, we'll move on, so I won't debrief from that. But what just wanted to lift this structured literacy info map up. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you take a closer look at it. If you just Google IDA, Structured Literacy Info Map, IDA for International Dyslexia Association, IDA Structured Literacy Info Map, you just Google that and it should come right up. What I wanted to point out here is the what and the how of structured literacy. It's grounded in the science of reading, which is the accumulated research base on reading and writing acquisition. And when we look at these components here of the what, we see a lot of what we understand around good, high quality literacy instruction. Some of the labels might be a little bit different than we've seen in Scarborough's reading rope or the five components. It's just more um, fleshed out, more nuanced, if you will, with this some of the nomenclature here. But one of the things I really want to point out is this piece here where it says the instructional content integrates the domains of language as they pertain to reading and written expression. And so just to reiterate this point, that reading builds on language, literacy builds on language, and structured literacy at the heart of it is focused on this idea of language development. And then there's the how, right? The effective instructional practices that are necessary for that direct and systematic and mastery-oriented instruction. So, of course, we know explicit instruction to be the I do, we do, you do. Maya talked about this already, so I won't belabor that. But just to say and connect the dots here with some of these ideas around effective instruction that you may, if you're familiar with Anita Archer and her colleague Charles Hughes, who wrote the book Explicit Instruction, um, talk a lot about instructional design principles and instructional delivery principles. And all of these aspects really pertain to that. When we talk about systematic instruction, when we talk about supportive instruction, we're providing that affirming feedback. we're scaffolding, we're increasing the intensity, which is another way of saying releasing the scaffold and giving students more opportunities to do the work. We're building their background knowledge, not only in world knowledge, but also literacy knowledge as well, right? We're engaging them and motivating them through active learning techniques. We're having adequate pacing. We have a very clear purpose, and we're not going bird walking and going around and different things and confusing kids, and we're limiting our teacher talk, especially when we're in an explicit instruction mode. Now, certainly effective instruction, explicit instruction isn't going to be 24/7 in a classroom, but there's times for that type of instruction, and there's other times for other types of instruction as well. Let's see, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maya to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dale. We can go to the next slide. So, really, just bringing all of that home, literally, to our house of language and literacy, and wanting to spend some time thinking about spoken language and how that is the foundation for our four domains of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I think that, we are familiar with the reading rope, or perhaps familiar with the IDA infographic, but really understanding that if we cannot skip the opportunity for spoken language practice, this is very important to our reading instruction. And we spent so much time both on the reading rope and the IDA infographic showing where language comprehension shows up, showing how it is broken out into all of its specific parts. We talked about morphology, we talked about syntax, we talked about pragmatics, we talked about vocabulary, and really thinking about how do we spend time creating opportunities for spoken language that is using the infographic, using the reading rope, so that we know what we're teaching. And then we're also having to connect that to content. So, I used my example earlier about, frogs and toads. That might be the content that we're talking about. We can be thinking about our grammar. We can think about our vocabulary. We can think about all the language objectives of that conversation and understand that the time that we spend creating opportunities for spoken language practice that are that use effective instructional practices along with the language comprehension components to create our language objective. If we're doing those things and creating opportunities for spoken language practice, then that is going to support everything we do when we talk about foundational skills and when we also talk about later reading comprehension. So really wanting to separate and understand that language comprehension spoken is one thing in terms of the doing of it. It is the output, the creating of the output, just like writing is the creating or the output of the reading and the listening that we're doing. So spending time with that spoken language and having opportunities for creating output. Later, I think, on Thursday, I'm going to answer some other more very specific questions about how much time and how do we address these issues and what do we create during this portion of our lesson. So today, what we did is we spent time showing how it's related to structured literacy and how structured multiliteracy is a, continuation of all of the things that we know about language and reading, really how someone learns how to read and how that is connected to language, both receiving that language, receptive through listening and through reading, and then also expressive, how we express that language through speaking and writing. But understanding that the time that we spend in spoken language instruction and the time we allow the students to practice speaking is very important to all the rest of the domains. And it cannot be overstated. I think many times as teachers, we think, well, my students have done some talking in class. We've done phonemic awareness activities. I did a read aloud. We talked about some vocabulary words. All of those are wonderful. All of those are great. All of those are necessary. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an opportunity for actual conversations that are built around syntax and content and opportunities for speaking practice, much like what we saw at the very beginning of this of today with the video of the caregiver and the child. It looks like that in some ways, but of course it's more intentional in the classroom because the teacher is very intentional about the objective of the language and the content. Next slide. And so to say again, we are here to embrace linguistic diversity, understanding that heritage languages are assets, that we use the cognitive background of the student, we leverage their knowledge, and structured literacy gives us a fabulous roadmap of what to look for, how to think about like all of those pieces in structured literacy on the reading rope and in the IDA infographic. All of those pieces exist in every other language as well. So we understand that we can immediately make those connections. We have vocabulary, we have syntax, we have grammar, we have prosody, we have pragmatics, we have morphology, we have phonology, we have all of those components exist in every other language. And that's the first place we look in order to make the connection to the languages that we're teaching. I'm responsible for teaching English, and that means I'm responsible to know my language very well. It means I'm responsible for understanding the grammar of my language, the morphology of my language, the etymology of my language. The more I know about the language of instruction that I'm responsible for, the easier it is for me to make connections to the languages that our students are speaking and helping them connect. They maintain their heritage language. By all means, keep speaking your heritage language. We foster that, and then we know that all of that is cognitive background that can be leveraged to learn the new language. In this case, I happen to be speaking about English. So it's really important that the more we know and make the connections, which is why we spent nearly an hour making the connections between what we know from science of reading to language learning, because it's an amazing roadmap to help all of us become language teachers, which we all are. So next slide, please. So together, we can embrace structured multiliteracy, which includes all students, as we work towards a thriving multilingual future. We know it's possible to learn how to read, write, and speak in two languages at the same time. I'm going to stop with 3 minutes, just in case there's some questions. If you want to come off of mute, you can leave it there for a second, Dale. You can take your phones out. These are places that you can follow us. If you want to know more about our professional learning, you can reach directly out to me or Dale or Rebecca. She'll be happy to send you our way. Nikki will take a minute to type in our email addresses into the chat. Nikki can also respond to any questions, but we have professional learning centered around second language acquisition and the science of reading and a whole host of other things if you're interested. Where do you suggest finding strategies for our EL students to meet the needs in general education classrooms? Well, Ariana, I mean, that is one of CORE's bread and butter offerings is understanding the strategies and the things to use with multilingual learners in your classrooms as it relates to science of reading, structured literacy. I mean, there are plenty of other places you can look to go. There are articles. Our article that we wrote gives you ideas and strategies. You can read Dr. Elsa Cardenas Hagen's book, Effective Instruction for English Learners. She talks about structured literacy and English learners very specifically. The teaching reading source book, which CORE provides, you can buy that on its own, also has strategies in it. You can read articles by Dr. Claude Goldenberg. You can learn and read more from Dr. Yulia Kovalman. I bring her up because I know she's coming to you soon. There's lots of places, and if that's not enough, I'm happy to give you more resources. I have a Spanish speaker who is illiterate in both Spanish and English. Do you recommend that she learns to read both in English and Spanish at the same time? She is 12. I mean, if there's a dual immersion opportunity for her, absolutely. I mean, it's completely possible to do that, learn both. Just depends, Christine, on what's available. When it comes to, how to move forward, you have to take into consideration, of course, all the things that you know, which is your own community, what's available, who's available, teaching wise. If it's not available to teach both in English and Spanish at the same time, then, on campus, you're likely responsible for English. And I would just encourage the parents to do as much speaking, help them make sure they understand that maintaining their heritage language is going to help this child and actually help her learn more Spanish, of course, and also be leveraged to learn English. And, you can be responsible for teaching her how to read in English. And as soon as she knows how to decode in English, she'll be able to apply those skills back to Spanish. I mean, luckily in this case, both alphabetic languages. There's some things that can be pointed out in terms of pronunciations, like vowels and what they're written in English and how we say them, which will be different in Spanish. But the decoding, the sense of decoding, and the foundational skills will transfer. So it just depends on what's available for her. But yes, I mean, if it's available dual immersion, by all means, go for it.
Right. With that, I just want to thank both Dale and Maya for joining us this evening. And you're a gift, both of you. I love the clarity. And for me, as a practitioner in my day-to-day and working with a lot of coaches and instructors in our county, I just have to say, and across Michigan, what a gift it is for many of us that we're looking for the magic thing that we were supposed to add, right? We can teach all of our kids, and all of our kids, no matter whether multilingual learners or English as their heritage language, right? That strong language instruction is going to benefit everyone under our in our sitting underneath us in our classrooms. And you took, Maya, when I first heard you, you just took so much weight off my shoulders as number one, a leader in the literacy space and supporting students and teachers. If we really dig into the structured literacy and honor heritage language, and I love what you said about becoming an expert in my own language. We've been so concerned about having to become an expert in other languages. So you both have just brought such a gift. Just appreciate you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. And I'll
Yes.
see some of you on Thursday.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.